I'm Susan Yawkey with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, the U.S. is skeptical of the Syrian president's peace commitments. Palestinians want the UN to react to Israel's actions. Will the U.S. withdrawal from Iraq tempt Iran to fill the void?
Let me make clear to them and to anybody else that America will maintain a presence in that part of the world.
And Egyptians look for a reprieve on the Eid holiday. It's all ahead on VOA. The United States has expressed deep skepticism that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad intends to fulfill commitments made to the Arab League this week to end the country's political crisis. U.S. officials say there is no sign security forces are pulling back from urban areas. VOA's David Gollust has details from the State Department.
U.S. officials say they welcome the Arab League attempt to end the political violence in Syria that has claimed more than 3,000 lives since February. But they say there are no signs the Assad government intends to implement its pledges to withdraw security forces from cities, release political prisoners, and hold talks with the opposition. The Syrian government accepted the so-called roadmap to a settlement on Wednesday, but news reports said security forces are continuing lethal attacks on protesters, with dozens of casualties reported in the central city of Homs, a hotbed of unrest. At the State Department, spokeswoman Victoria Nuland said the Assad government appears to have added to what she said is its long, deep, and continuing history of broken promises.
Acceptance of the initiative, if it were to actually be implemented, would include all of the following things immediately: stopping of the violence, release of the detainees, withdrawal of all elements of the armed forces from populated areas, and immediately allowing free and unfettered access to journalists and to the Arab League monitors that they've offered. So that's the standard by which we will judge this, and we have not seen it yet.
President Assad has made reform offers since the start of the unrest that have largely gone unfulfilled. Some figures in the Syrian opposition have expressed cautious support for the Arab League initiative, while others say only the president's resignation can end the conflict. Journalist and Middle East expert Robin Wright, a senior fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace, says Mr. Assad's acceptance of the Arab League plan appears thus far to be a ploy to buy time rather than a serious effort to stem the violence.
President Assad has no credibility left, really, in part because he has been so vicious, so consistently, in so many places for so long. But at this point, he's in such trouble that actually to have honored the deal would almost certainly have opened the way for greater displays of dissent against him.
Wright said while the Syrian leader may be able to extend his time in office, it is hard to believe he can weather the crisis long term, given what she termed the extraordinary scope of dissent at home and sanctions that now include a European embargo on Syrian crude oil imports. The European Union, which has joined the United States in calling on President Assad to step down, said the Syrian leader needs to quickly and fully follow through on the commitments to the Arab League and open the political space for a peaceful transition. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said Mr. Assad, who has not kept past promises, must implement the Arab League plan as soon as possible, and that the killing in Syria must stop immediately. David Gollust, VOA News, the State Department.
We invite you to listen to our new podcast, Middle East Voices. Just Google Middle East Voices Weekly Podcast. This week, a discussion of the endgame in Syria. An Arab Spring revolutionary shares his story. And the funniest jokes from the uprising in Egypt's Tahrir Square. Just Google Middle East Voices Weekly Podcast. The Obama administration plans to pull all U.S. troops out of Iraq by the end of this year, after failing to secure agreement with the Iraqi government on keeping some military presence there. Analysts say the upcoming troop withdrawal may tempt Iran to try to extend its influence in Iraq. But as VOA senior correspondent Gary Thomas reports, such a move would heighten an already bitter rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, not to mention the tensions between Tehran and Washington.
Iran is likely to run into opposition from both the U.S. and Saudi Arabia if it tries to extend its reach in Iraq after U.S. troops pull out at the end of the year, analysts say. George Friedman, chief of the private intelligence firm Stratfor, says Iran sees the withdrawal as an opportunity.
The Iranians have made it very clear that they regard the American withdrawal as a vacuum, and that they intend to fill the vacuum. We have seen some substantial tension emerge between Saudi Arabia and Iran, including, of course, the story that Iranian operatives were planning to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States and destroy the Saudi embassy.
The decision for a complete U.S. troop pullout was an unexpected one. Washington had been discussing with Baghdad the possibility of keeping some permanent bases in Iraq. The Obama administration had hoped to keep some troops there to continue training Iraqi security forces. The talks collapsed when Iraq refused to grant U.S. troops immunity for prosecution in Iraqi courts. But echoing statements by other U.S. officials, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta sent a clear warning that the troop withdrawal from Iraq does not mean the U.S. is abandoning the region.
For Iran and anybody else who has any other ideas, let me make clear that the United States maintains 40,000 troops in that region, 23,000 in Kuwait, and numbers of others in countries throughout that region. Let me make clear to them and to anybody else that America will maintain a presence in that part of the world.
Published reports say active discussions are underway in policy circles about bolstering the American military presence in the Gulf region. Options reportedly under consideration include stationing additional troops in Kuwait and deploying more naval warships in the area's international waters. Concern about Iran's ambitions and influence in Iraq is long-standing, dating back to even before the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Iraq is a Muslim country with about two-thirds Shiite Muslims and one-third Sunnis. Under Saddam Hussein, it was a secular dictatorship. Iran is a mainly Shiite Muslim country and is governed by an Islamic clerical elite. During Saddam Hussein's rule, many Iraqi Shiite leaders took refuge in Iran. But former U.S. Ambassador to Syria, Theodore Katouf, says being co-religionists does not make the two countries good neighbors.
Iranians are Persians by and large, and Iraqis are Arabs by and large, and they fought a very lengthy, very bloody and awful war in the 1980s. And I don't believe that the wounds from that conflict are fully healed. And just because at least some Iraqi Shia share a common religion with Iran, it doesn't mean that they follow the same ayatollahs and the like.
During the U.S. invasion of 2003, U.S. officials accused Iran of backing armed Shiite militias. Iran is also reported to have tried to exert deeper political and economic influence in Iraq since the fall of Saddam Hussein. Analysts say the country in the region most nervous about Iran's regional ambitions is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is predominantly Sunni Muslim and run by a hereditary monarchy. Analyst Alex Vatanka of the Middle East Institute says that if there's a conflict in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iran are bound to be on opposite sides.
Saudi Arabia supported Saddam Hussein against Iran, and that's the sort of big beginning of the sort of conflict in many ways between Tehran and Riyadh. You've had Iranian-Saudi rivalry in Afghanistan in the 1990s. You see that today in Lebanon among support for the various Palestinian factions. They oppose each other, and Iraq would be no different.
Vatanka adds that Iraqi Shiites feel estranged from the larger Arab world, which is predominantly Sunni Muslim.
In effect, what has happened is Iraq Shias have been left with few options. They are pushed into the arms of Iran because instead of being seen as Arabs, they're first seen as Shias, because Saudi Arabia tends to play that sectarian card.
But analysts wonder how much energy Iran has to devote to Iraq. They point out that Iran is preoccupied by internal problems such as international sanctions over its nuclear program and deepening political splits among the ruling elite, particularly between President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Gary Thomas, VOA News, Washington.
Iran is competing with Russia as it seeks to forge closer ties with Tajikistan. the one Persian-speaking nation of the former Soviet Central Asia. VOA's James Brooke reports from Tajikistan's capital, Dushanbe.
The capitals of Iran and Tajikistan are 1,000 kilometers apart, but when their presidents meet, they don't need interpreters.
انتقال آب و برق از تاجیکستان به ایران خط آهن جاده و همینطور مطالعه.
That's Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad speaking in Dushanbe with Tajikistan's President Emomali Rahmon. They lead the world's two majority Persian-speaking nations. 20 years ago, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Iran was the first nation to recognize an independent Tajikistan. Iran's red, white, and green tricolor flag served as a model for Tajikistan's flag. Muhyiddin Kabiri is head of Tajikistan's Islamic Renewal Party.
Большинство граждан Ирана шииты, а мы таджики сунниты, то у нас общая история.
Kabiri notes that Iranians are Shiite Muslims and Tajiks are Sunni Muslims. Otherwise, he says, the two peoples are united by a common history, literature, and language. Iranian President Ahmadinejad has called the relationship one spirit in two bodies. Iran's president was here in September to inaugurate one hydroelectric plant and to sign an agreement for a second one. Iran is to operate both plants until it has won back its investments through electricity sales. Saifullah Safarov is deputy director of Tajikistan's Center for Strategic Studies, a government-affiliated think tank. He says the two nations' interests align in energy, trade, and culture. Iran is the second largest foreign investor in Tajikistan after China. Now, China and Iran are planning to build a connecting rail line through Tajikistan and Afghanistan. But Russia is still the dominant power here. Kabiri's Islamic Party works closely with Tajik migrant workers in Russia.
Иран не заменит Россию никогда. Также и Россия не может заменить Иран.
He says Iran will never replace Russia. He notes that 1 million Tajik men now support their families by working in Russia. But Moscow's rule of Tajikistan lasted only 1 century, compared to Tajikistan's 2,500 years of common history with the ancient Persian Empire. Zafar Abdullayev, a pro-democracy blogger here, believes that Iran and Tajikistan will eventually form a visa-free common market.
И когда власти или общество в Иране станет чуть-чуть более демократичным и толерантным.
He says that for Tajikistan, an officially largely secular nation, keys to closer ties will be more democracy and more tolerance in Iran. 2 decades after the collapse of Soviet power in Central Asia, Abdullayev and others say that it is now Iran's turn to liberalize. James Brooke, VOA News, Dushanbe, Tajikistan.
The Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations says his government will ask the UN Security Council to take action against Israel's withholding of some $100 million in tax payments to the Palestinian Authority and its decision to add 2,000 more settlement units. The Israeli move follows the Palestinians' admission into a UN agency on Monday. From the United Nations, VOA's Margaret Bashir reports.
Palestinian envoy Riyad Mansour told reporters Thursday that his government sent a letter to the Security Council, the UN's most powerful body, on Wednesday, saying the Israeli actions were provocative and an act of retaliation for Palestinian actions that were fully within their legal rights. Ambassador Mansour said the Palestinians want the Security Council to issue a formal response to the Israeli actions.
We want the Security Council to react to this latest escalation and provocation with a view of stopping it and containing it, because you all know that if it is not contained, it might lead to further escalations and provocations, and the situation is very volatile in our region.
It was not immediately clear what action the Council might consider. In February, the United States vetoed a Security Council resolution condemning all Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territory as illegal, saying that while it agreed that settlements are illegitimate, the resolution harmed chances for peace talks. Member states voted this week in Paris to give the Palestinians full membership in UNESCO, the UN's cultural and scientific organization. The application for membership at UNESCO is part of the Palestinians' larger effort to win full UN admission through the Security Council. That application, submitted in late September, is currently under review by the Council's Admissions Committee. It was to be discussed in a private meeting Thursday afternoon. The United States and now Canada have said they will pull their funding to UNESCO. That will deprive the organization of about 25% of its operating budget, something UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has expressed concern about. Ambassador Mansour said the funding decision is unfortunate and hoped it would be reversed.
And to punish UNESCO financially for this harmless act and legal act by the Palestinian side is beyond comprehension.
Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Malki has said there are no immediate plans to seek membership in any other UN agencies, but rather they would focus on their bid for full UN admission. A vote on that could come as early as November 11th, when the Admissions Committee will present its report to the full Council, reflecting the positions of the 15 members on the Palestinian application. The United States has said it will veto the bid, but that may not be necessary if there are not 9 votes supporting the application from the other 14 members. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Testimony continues in the military trial of American soldier Calvin Gibbs, accused of masterminding war crimes allegedly committed by the platoon he led in Afghanistan. If convicted, Gibbs could face life in prison without parole. VOA Pentagon correspondent Luis Ramirez reports from Joint Base Lewis McChord in the U.S. state of Washington.
It was in remote areas of Kandahar province where military prosecutors allege that Gibbs plotted fake combat scenes and planned the murders of Afghan civilians. Alleged victims included an unarmed 15-year-old boy picked at random in a field, shot before soldiers posed with his body for keepsake photos, like this one published in a German newspaper, and since presented as evidence at Gibbs' trial. One after another, members of Gibbs' platoon, some of them already convicted in the case, have testified about the boredom, rampant drug use in the unit, and of Gibbs' hatred of Afghan people, whom he is alleged to have described as savages. In this building at the base, the panel of soldiers deciding on Gibbs' fate has seen graphic evidence, including photos of severed fingers that witnesses say Gibbs cut off Afghans and kept as trophies. Gibbs pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of murder and 13 other charges. In opening statements, his lawyer said Gibbs had been betrayed by members of his platoon and was not responsible for the killings. In the days ahead, the military jury will decide. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State.
As Libyans try to resume their normal lives after the uprising that ended Muammar Gaddafi's 42-year rule, many hope for economic improvements and more jobs. In Tripoli, VOA's Al Pessin found people starting to once again go about their business.
At one of Tripoli's modern shopping centers, repair work was underway to fix the damage caused when the city became a battleground just a few weeks earlier. Inside, it was a normal shopping day, but people could hardly contain their feelings.
I smell the freedom for all the time and all the minute and all the seconds, because my freedom and all the people's freedom is captured for 42 years.
Thanks to God and thanks to the rebels, now we are free. We're feeling indescribable happiness about that.
Not far away in the Old City Bazaar, fabric salesman Siraj Bashir Ayad says there was almost no business during the revolution. Now, he says, things are a little better, and he hopes for even more business in the coming months.
100% for sure. Tourism will be much, much better than it used to be. In the past, tourists were monitored by security forces. Now, they will have more freedom.
Gold shop owner Abdul Hamid Sadiq Abeya also has hopes for the tourist trade.
We have tourist sites that were neglected during Gaddafi's time. We hope the new government will take better care of these areas.
He's talking about sites like this Roman ruin, just 100 kilometers east of Tripoli on the shore of the Mediterranean.
My name is Osama Mohammed Karemi. I'm local guide in the site of Leptis Magna. Leptis Magna, one of the best heritage sites still preserved right now. The work in the city, it's only 30% done and 70% still under the sand.
Much of Libya's income will continue to come from its oil exports. But journalist Fatih Benissa says Libya's future prosperity will depend on what kind of country Libyans decide to have.
When we determine the nature of the state, then we will determine what kind of economy we will have, whether it will be a directed economy or an open market economy.
That will be among the many questions facing Libyans as they work on their political and economic future. Al Pessin, VOA News, Tripoli.
Many Egyptians are seeing added significance in this year's Eid al-Adha, the Muslim festival of sacrifice. For them, it's been a tumultuous year that brought one political era to an end and ushered in an uncertain future as elections loom. VOA's Elizabeth Arrett reports from Cairo. Some are looking forward to another aspect of the Eid, the granting of reprieve.
In the narrow alleyways around Cairo's Sayyida Zainab Mosque, Eid al-Adha has many thinking about the sacrifices of their countrymen this year. Ahmed is a young butcher in this ancient quarter. He remembers the many human beings who lost their lives in Egypt's revolution. He says they were sacrificed for the sake of the country. Sacrifice is key to the Eid, honoring the Prophet Abraham. According to the traditions of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, he was ready to sacrifice his son to show obedience to God. That kind of sacrifice, Ahmed says, continues, and not just with the martyrs. The country has no money, and the youth are suffering. There are others who believe much of the sacrifice, not just in Egypt, but throughout the Arab world, has been made on the altar of foreign powers. Fellow butcher Abu Bakr Mohammed says that like Iraq's Saddam Hussein, executed on the first day of the Eid al-Adha in 2006, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi was also slaughtered. Mohammed says Arabs should stand together because every year more Arabs are lost and countries are taken from us. As Egyptians make their way through the post-revolution period, frustrations are mounting on many fronts. Some, like Mohammed, are aimed outward, while others blame their new leaders for going back on what seemed the promise of a better life. Working his way through the market stalls around Sayyida Zainab, Yahya leads a buffalo to slaughter, the animal destined to play a role in the sacrificial rites of the Eid. For in the story of Abraham, God grants a last-minute reprieve and allows a ram to be slaughtered instead of the son. Yahya says Egyptians have more sacrifices ahead, but their own reprieve is not far off. Trust me, he says, what's needed is patience. The country will rise. Egyptians will have a new president, a good parliament, and a good constitution. Yahya says that change cannot come overnight. God himself, he argues, could have made the world in a day, but he took 6 days to teach us patience. Elizabeth Arrett, VOA News, Cairo.
This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, the U.S. President holds a news conference on the world's economic woes. Thanks for tuning in to the Voice of America.
For more on the stories you've heard on our radio programs, visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA program. That's at voanews.com. Online news for a changing world.